The entire estate went silent, not because of a gunshot, not because of a threat, but because someone did the unthinkable. In the center of the marble entrance hall, beneath the imported crystal chandelier, John Cohn, the scar-faced mafia boss everyone feared, raised his tattooed fist high and deadly, ready to strike a trembling houseboy like he always did. Everyone froze. The cooks, the cleaners, the guards at the door. Even Marcus, his right-hand man, stopped moving for a moment. They all knew what was coming. John always made examples of people when he was angry. And today he was furious. But something impossible happened. A hand wrapped around his wrist. Not trembling, not apologetic, but steady, like iron wrapped in silk, refusing to bend. It was the new maid, Loveland Anna. A quiet woman. A woman who arrived only 3 days ago. A woman nobody expected to even look up from her work, much less touch the untouchable boss in front of everyone. But here she was, holding John's raised fist, refusing to let it fall. Every worker gasped. "What do you think you're doing?" John growled, his scarred face inches from hers, shaking with shock and rage. But Loveland didn't let go. Her grip stayed firm. Her dark eyes stayed calm. And then, unknown to everyone, Viktor Volkov, the head of the Russian Bratva, stood just outside the archway, arriving for an unexpected meeting. He stopped walking. He heard the commotion. He turned his head slowly. Then he saw it. The infamous John Cohn, frozen mid-strike, held in place by a black maid in a powder blue uniform. Viktor didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, his mind calculating, because something he could use had just revealed itself. And the next words John spoke cut through the air like a blade. "Let go, now." But Loveland's grip did not move. That moment, that single moment, would change everything. And then a shocked whisper rippled through the room because something even more impossible happened next. John tried to pull his arm free, but he couldn't, not because of her physical strength, but because something in her eyes stopped him. His face flushed. His jaw clenched. He struggled internally. Still, he couldn't strike her. Everyone stared at the new maid in disbelief. And from the archway, Viktor whispered to himself with a cold smile, "Interesting. So the monster has found his weakness." And just as Marcus stepped forward to intervene, someone else appeared in the doorway behind Viktor, someone whose presence would make everything far more dangerous. The Cohn estate sat on 20 acres of manicured perfection, surrounded by walls that kept secrets better than they kept intruders out. Inside, Italian marble stretched across floors that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Paintings worth millions hung on walls that had witnessed unspeakable things. And through it all, 12 people moved like shadows, cleaning, cooking, serving. Never making noise, never making eye contact, never making mistakes. Because mistakes got you hurt. Everyone in the city knew John Cohn's name. The scar-faced boss who controlled every illegal operation from the docks to downtown. Drug routes, smuggling networks, protection rackets, all of it flowed through his tattooed hands. But it wasn't just his business empire that made people fear him. It was the way he maintained it. Swift, brutal, personal. He didn't send messages through intermediaries. He delivered them himself, usually with his fists, always with those cold eyes staring through the jagged scars that ran from his temple to his jaw. Every morning at 6, John walked through his estate like a general inspecting troops. He checked every room, questioned every task, and found fault in everything. The staff had learned to move faster when they heard his footsteps. To breathe quieter when he entered a room. To become invisible unless he wanted to see them. Marcus Delian followed 2 steps behind, always smiling that easy smile, always smoothing over John's rougher edges with the staff, but only after John left the room. "He's under pressure," Marcus would say. "You know how it is. Just stay out of his way." The staff loved Marcus. He remembered their names, asked about their families, slipped them extra money during holidays. If John was the storm, Marcus was the calm after. No one suspected that Marcus's charm was a mask just as carefully constructed as John's rage. On a gray Tuesday morning, Loveland Anna arrived through the service entrance, carrying everything she owned in a single worn duffel bag. She wore the powder blue uniform they'd sent her, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture straight despite 3 buses and a long walk to get here. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, a thin woman with tired eyes, met her in the kitchen. You're the new girl, Mrs. Chen said, not unkindly. Let me give you the rules. First, don't look at his face, another maid whispered, grabbing Loveland's arm. Maria, her name tag read. Her grip was urgent. Don't speak unless he speaks to you first. And don't ever challenge him. Not even with your eyes. Why? Loveland asked quietly. Maria's face went pale. Because the last girl who did isn't here anymore. That afternoon, Loveland was polishing silverware in the dining room when she heard the commotion. A young server named Tommy had spilled wine on the Persian rug. Before he could apologize, John was there. No warning, just a sharp crack as John's palm connected with the boy's face, sending him stumbling backward. The other staff scattered like roaches when lights turn on. But Loveland stayed in the doorway, silverware forgotten in her hands, watching as Tommy cowered on the floor, blood trickling from his split lip. John stood over him, scarred face twisted with contempt. Clean it, with your shirt. Tommy scrambled to obey, tears mixing with wine and blood. Loveland's fingers tightened around the silver fork until her knuckles went pale. And in that moment, watching a powerful man humiliate someone powerless, she thought, this is what my father's world looked like before it killed him. 3 days later, everything changed in the span of a heartbeat. It was early afternoon when David, a 16-year-old houseboy who'd worked at the estate for barely 2 months, was dusting the artifacts in the grand entrance hall. His hands moved carefully over each piece, just as Mrs. Chen had taught him. But when he reached for the Ming Dynasty vase on the pedestal, the one John had acquired from a collector who'd suddenly decided to emigrate, his sleeve caught the edge. Time seemed to slow as the vase tipped, wobbled, then tumbled toward the marble floor. The crash echoed through the entire first floor like a gunshot. David stood frozen, staring at the shattered pieces of porcelain worth more than his family would earn in 10 years. Blue and white fragments scattered across the marble like broken promises. His face drained of all color. His hands began to shake. Within seconds, footsteps thundered from the west wing. Heavy, purposeful, furious. John appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his scarred face already twisted with rage before he even saw what happened. Marcus emerged from the study behind him, his expression shifting from casual to calculated in an instant. The staff who'd been working nearby, 3 maids, the butler, 2 guards. All backed away from David like he'd contracted something contagious. What the hell did you do? John's voice came out low and deadly, the kind of quiet that was worse than shouting. David opened his mouth but no sound came out. His legs started trembling. One of the maids, Maria, reached for him instinctively, but the head butler grabbed her wrist and pulled her back, shaking his head. Don't make it worse for yourself. John descended the stairs slowly, each footfall deliberate. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows made his scars look deeper, angrier. His tattooed hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. They'd all seen it before. Some had felt it themselves. Do you know what that was worth? John's voice was still quiet, which meant he was at his most dangerous. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean. Didn't mean? John's volume finally rose. You didn't mean to destroy something priceless? You didn't mean to disrespect everything I've built? David backed up until his shoulders hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. The other staff had melted away completely now, disappearing into doorways and around corners. Even Marcus stayed at the top of the stairs, watching with that unreadable expression he always wore during these moments. John closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His tattooed fist rose high, pulled back, ready to deliver the kind of blow that would send a clear message to everyone watching from their hiding places. Incompetence has consequences. David squeezed his eyes shut, arms coming up uselessly to protect his face. The strike never landed. Instead, John felt something impossible, a firm grip around his wrist, stopping his fist mid-swing. Not trembling, not apologetic, just steady, like iron wrapped in silk. His head snapped around, and his eyes met Loveland Anna's calm gaze. She stood beside him, her hand wrapped around his tattooed wrist, her powder blue uniform pristine, her posture straight, her dark eyes meeting his scarred face without flinching. She'd crossed the entire entrance hall while everyone else ran away. She'd stepped directly into the path of his violence. She'd done the unthinkable. The room went absolutely silent. John's face contorted, shock, rage, and something else he couldn't name, all fighting for dominance. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice came out strangled, disbelieving. Loveland's grip didn't waver. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but carried through the entire hall. "Let him go." John tried to pull his arm free. But something stopped him, not her physical strength, though her grip was surprisingly firm, but something in her eyes. They held no fear, no judgment, no challenge. Just a quiet certainty that what he was about to do was wrong, and she would not allow it. "Let him go," he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You first," Loveland said simply. Their eyes locked. His scarred face was inches from hers. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to explode. But he didn't strike her. Couldn't strike her. For the first time in 15 years, John Cone found himself unable to follow through with violence, and he had no idea why. From the doorway, Marcus watched with suddenly sharp eyes, his easy smile completely gone. After what felt like an eternity but was only seconds, John's fist slowly unclenched. His arm lowered. Loveland released his wrist and stepped back, her hands folding calmly in front of her. David collapsed against the wall, gasping like he'd been holding his breath underwater. John stared at Loveland, his chest heaving, everything he thought he knew about control suddenly uncertain. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward his study, his footsteps heavy with confusion and something that might have been shame. The entire household stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. And Loveland quietly knelt down and began picking up the broken pieces of porcelain, as if she hadn't just stopped a hurricane with her bare hands. By evening, the whispers had spread through every corner of the estate like smoke under doors. In the kitchen, staff spoke in hushed tones while chopping vegetables. In the laundry room, maids exchanged glances over folding sheets. Even the guards at the gate murmured to each other during their shift change. "Did you see it?" She just grabbed his hand. And he didn't hit her. He didn't even yell. "I've been here 4 years. I've never seen him back down. Not once." Who is she? Nobody had answers, only questions that felt dangerous to ask out loud. In John's private study, Marcus closed the door with deliberate care before turning to face his boss. John stood at the window, one hand gripping a glass of whiskey, staring out at nothing. The setting sun cast long shadows across his scarred face. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his usual easy charm replaced with something sharper. John didn't turn around. "Then talk." "You're going soft." Marcus let the words hang in the air. "People are noticing." "People?" John's voice was flat. "The men. The lieutenants. They're asking questions." Marcus moved closer, his tone carefully measured. "You've built everything on strength. On fear. On the certainty that crossing you means consequences. But today what?" John turned, his cold eyes meeting Marcus's. "Today you let a maid stop you from disciplining your staff." Marcus spread his hands. "In front of everyone. What message does that send?" John's jaw clenched. His fingers tightened around the glass until it should have shattered. But he said nothing, because Marcus was right, and they both knew it. "I'm just saying," Marcus continued, softening his approach, "you need to be careful. The Russians are already circling. The Italians are watching for weakness. If they think you're losing your edge." He let the implication finish itself. After Marcus left, John poured himself another drink he wouldn't finish and tried to understand what had happened in that entrance hall. Why couldn't he hit her? He'd struck men twice her size for lesser offenses. He'd broken bones, ended lives, built an empire on the certainty of his own ruthlessness. But when her hand wrapped around his wrist, when her dark eyes met his without flinching, something inside him had simply stopped. Those eyes, calm, unafraid, not judging him, just seeing him. Like she was looking past the scars, past the reputation, past everything he'd built to protect himself, and seeing something he'd buried 15 years ago. Something he thought was dead. It reminded him of before. Of Dmitri. Of the brother who'd believed people could be more than their worst choices. The thought made his chest tight with an emotion he refused to name. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Loveland sat beside David on his narrow bed, cleaning the scrapes on his arms with careful hands. The boy had finally stopped shaking, though his eyes were still wide with residual fear. "Why did you do that?" he whispered. He could have killed you. Loveland dabbed antiseptic on a cut, her movements gentle. Maybe, but he was definitely going to hurt you. That's how it is here. David winced. We all know the rules. We stay quiet, we stay safe. Safe? Loveland looked up at him. You call living in fear safe? Maria appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression torn between admiration and terror. You don't understand. The last person who stood up to him disappeared. Just, gone. We never saw her again. Then why do you stay? Loveland asked quietly. Maria's face hardened. Because we need the money. Because jobs like this, they pay enough to feed families. Because out there, she gestured toward the window, toward the city beyond the walls, it's even more dangerous for people like us. Loveland nodded slowly, understanding more than Maria realized. She'd grown up in that dangerous world. She knew exactly what desperation looked like. Across the estate, in a penthouse downtown, Marcus Delian answered his burner phone on the second ring. Da? The Russian accent was thick, unmistakable. It's me, Marcus said, stepping onto his balcony where no one could overhear. You have update? Marcus smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Better than an update. I have an opportunity. John is compromised. Compromised how? There's a woman. A maid. She's gotten under his skin somehow. Made him hesitate. Marcus watched the city lights flicker on below. He's vulnerable right now. Distracted. If we move carefully. We have been patient long time, the Russian interrupted. Your boss controls territory we want. Docks, shipping routes, distribution networks. You give us access, we help you take throne. This is deal. I know the deal, Victor. Marcus's voice hardened. I'm telling you the time is right. But we have to be smart. John still has loyal men. We need him to look weak first. Unstable. Then when we move, no one will question it. How long? Give me 2 weeks. Maybe less. Just be ready. The line went dead. In his study, John stood at the window and found himself watching the servants' quarters, where warm light glowed from a second-floor window. He could see Loveland's silhouette moving inside, tending to David, doing something kind in a house built on cruelty. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass, scarred, hardened, barely recognizable from the man he'd been before everything broke. And for the first time in 15 years, John Cohn felt something he'd thought he'd killed. Doubt. A week after the vase incident, Mrs. Chen assigned Loveland to deep clean Marcus's office while he was out meeting with suppliers. It was considered a privilege. Marcus's space was always pristine, and he tipped generously when satisfied with the work. The other maids had practically fought over the assignment before Loveland's name was drawn. She should have known it was too good to be true. The office was exactly as polished as Marcus himself, mahogany desk, leather chairs, abstract art that probably cost a fortune. Loveland worked methodically, dusting shelves lined with books Marcus likely never read, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. When she moved to clean behind the desk, her elbow knocked a stack of folders onto the floor. Papers scattered across the expensive rug. Loveland knelt quickly to gather them, muttering an apology to the empty room. But as she collected the sheets, her hands slowed. Numbers caught her eye. Large numbers. Transfers, payments, accounts she recognized from overhearing John's business calls. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't. But something about the figures didn't align. Loveland had helped her grandmother manage their family's small restaurant for years before it closed. She understood bookkeeping basics. And these numbers, they told two different stories. The official ledger showed payments to legitimate shipping companies, security contractors, property maintenance. Standard business expenses for an operation like John's. But paper clipped to the back were different records, same dates, same vendors, but different amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in discrepancies. Money going out that never appeared in the primary books. Money disappearing into accounts with names that sounded corporate but felt hollow. Loveland's pulse quickened. This wasn't just sloppy accounting. This was theft. Systematic, calculated, massive theft. Marcus was stealing from John. She heard the footsteps too late. Find something interesting? Loveland's blood went cold. She looked up to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his easy smile gone, replaced by something calculating and dangerous. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. I was just cleaning, Loveland said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. These fell. I was picking them up. Marcus crossed the office slowly, each step deliberate. Of course you were. He held out his hand. I'll take those. Loveland stood, papers clutched in her hands. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't noticed anything. Just hand them over, apologize, walk away. But her hands didn't move. It's a lot of money, she said quietly. Marcus's smile returned, but it was cold now. Sharp. You're a smart woman, Loveland. Smarter than most of the people who work here. That's dangerous. Does John know? John knows what I want him to know. Marcus took another step closer. And right now, I don't want him knowing about this. Which means you have a choice to make. Loveland's fingers tightened on the papers. What kind of choice? The kind that keeps your little sister safe. Marcus's voice was silk over steel. Sierra, isn't it? 17? Senior year at Lincoln High? Takes the number 7 bus home every afternoon, walks 3 blocks alone to your grandmother's apartment? Loveland's stomach dropped. Her face must have shown it because Marcus's smile widened. Accidents happen to people who see too much, he continued softly. Especially in neighborhoods like yours. Muggings, hit and runs, gang violence. Such a shame when promising young girls get caught in crossfire. You wouldn't, but Loveland knew he would. She could see it in his eyes, the same cold calculation her father's killers had worn. I wouldn't want to, Marcus corrected. But I've worked too hard, too long, to let anyone interfere now. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand me those papers. You're going to forget you ever saw them. And you're going to keep being the quiet, obedient maid who doesn't ask questions. He extended his hand again. And in return, Sierra gets to graduate high school. Everyone wins. Loveland's mind raced. She could scream. John's office was just down the hall. But would he believe her over Marcus? Marcus, who'd been his right hand for years? And even if he did, would that make Sierra safer or put her in more danger? Slowly, Loveland handed over the papers. Marcus's smile returned to its usual warmth, like a mask sliding back into place. Smart girl. I knew you were. He straightened the documents, tapping them against his palm. You can finish cleaning now. And Loveland? This conversation never happened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus left, whistling softly. Loveland stood alone in the office, her heart pounding, her hands shaking now that he was gone. But her mind was already working. Because before Marcus had walked in, before he'd caught her, she'd done something automatic, something her grandmother had taught her when dealing with the restaurant's crooked landlord. When the papers had scattered, she'd taken photos with the phone hidden in her uniform pocket. Not all of them, just enough, just the most damning pages. The copies were grainy, some partially blurred, but they were proof. Proof she couldn't use yet. Not until she understood the full scope of Marcus's betrayal. Not until she had a plan that wouldn't get Sierra killed. She finished cleaning the office on autopilot, her mind spinning through possibilities. Marcus was stealing from John. John didn't know, and now Loveland held a secret that could destroy them both, or get her and everyone she loved killed. That night, in her small room in the servants' quarters, Loveland stared at the photos on her phone, the blue light casting shadows across her face. Outside her window, she could see John's study, the light still on at 2 in the morning. The man everyone feared didn't know his most trusted ally was his greatest enemy. And Loveland had to decide if saving him was worth risking everything she had left to lose. The attack came at 3 in the morning when the estate was darkest and most vulnerable. Loveland woke to the sound of shattering glass and automatic gunfire. She rolled off her narrow bed instinctively, her body remembering training from a childhood she'd tried to forget. More gunfire erupted from the south wing, close, too close. Screams echoed through the servants' quarters as people scrambled from their rooms in panic. Get down, Loveland shouted at Maria, who stood frozen in the hallway in her nightgown. Lock your door. Stay away from windows. She didn't wait to see if Maria listened. Her feet were already moving, muscle memory overriding fear. The estate's security alarm wailed uselessly. Whoever planned this had disabled the response system. More gunfire. Shouting in Russian. Heavy boots on marble floors. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. Loveland's mind raced through the estate's layout. John's study. He'd still be awake. He was always awake. and it was the most exposed room on the ground floor, surrounded by windows facing the gardens. If the attackers knew the property, and they clearly did, they'd hit there first. She ran toward the main house, keeping low, using shadows and doorways for cover. Her hands found the security panel near the kitchen entrance, the one the guards thought was decorative but she'd noticed was functional. Her fingers flew over the keypad, entering the code she'd memorized from watching John input it days ago. The weapons locker clicked open. Inside, handguns, rifles, ammunition. John's paranoia made practical. Loveland grabbed a Glock 19, checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, and chambered around. The weight of it in her hands was familiar, almost comforting. She'd sworn she'd never hold a gun again after her father died. But some promises were made to be broken. The study door hung partially open, wood splintered around the lock. Inside, muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Loveland dropped to a crouch and peered around the doorframe. John had overturned his massive desk for cover. 4 men in tactical gear advanced from the shattered windows, firing in controlled bursts. One of John's guards lay motionless near the bookshelf. John returned fire with a pistol, but he was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of ammunition. This was Marcus's doing. It had to be. Loveland steadied her breathing, just like her father had taught her on Sunday afternoons at the range, back when she'd thought he was just a security consultant and not a man whose past would eventually kill him. She stepped into the doorway, raised the Glock in a two-handed grip, and fired. The first shot took the nearest attacker in the shoulder. He spun, surprised, giving John the opening to take him down. The second and third shots drove the others into cover. Loveland moved laterally, repositioning, firing again. Her movements were fluid, economical, nothing like a terrified maid. Everything like a soldier. John stared at her for a split second, shock clear even in the darkness, before training took over and he focused on the remaining attackers. They fought in synchronized silence, John drawing fire while Loveland flanked, her shots precise, controlled. When the last attacker tried to escape through the window, John's bullet found him first. Then silence. Ringing, suffocating silence broken only by their heavy breathing and distant sirens finally responding. John stood slowly, his scarred face illuminated by the desk lamp that had somehow survived. His eyes locked on Loveland, still holding the Glock, still in shooting stance, still ready. Blood spattered her nightclothes, none of it hers. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was rough, dangerous, but genuinely asking. Loveland lowered the gun carefully, engaging the safety. "A maid. Maids don't shoot like that." John stepped over debris, moving closer. "Maids don't clear rooms like trained operators. Maids don't." He stopped, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you really?" Loveland met his eyes, and for once, she let him see past her careful composure. Let him see the girl who'd watched her father bleed out on their kitchen floor. The teenager who'd learned to shoot because powerlessness was a worse death than bullets. The woman who'd built walls as thick as his, just made of different materials. "My father was killed by men like you," she said quietly. Men who thought power came from fear. Who believed violence solved everything. Who forgot they were human until it was too late. John's jaw clenched. "Then why are you here? Why work for someone like me?" "Because my sister needs to eat. Because sometimes survival means swallowing pride." Loveland's voice hardened. "But I learned to shoot so I'd never be helpless again. And I learned that fear makes monsters of everyone, the ones who inflict it and the ones who live under it." John stared at her, his scarred face unreadable. Outside, more vehicles approached, his men responding, police finally arriving. The estate would be swarming with people in minutes. But in this moment, in this destroyed study, John Cone and Loveland Anna stood facing each other as equals for the first time. "They'll come back," John said finally. "Whoever sent them won't stop." "I know." Loveland glanced at the bodies, her expression grim. This was professional. Coordinated. Someone with access to your security schedules and floor plans. John's eyes narrowed. Someone inside. Loveland nodded slowly, and in that shared realization, an unspoken alliance formed. Because they both understood now that the real enemy wasn't in this room. The police left at dawn. John's men had cleaned up the bodies, disposed of evidence, paid off the right officials. By the time the sun rose over the estate, the only signs of violence were boarded windows and bullet holes John refused to let anyone repair. Reminders, he said, of what complacency costs. Loveland found him in the library an hour later, sitting in a leather chair that faced the gardens, a glass of whiskey untouched on the side table. He didn't look up when she entered, but he knew she was there. "You should rest," she said quietly. "So should you." John's voice was rough from smoke and shouting. "But we're both still awake." Loveland moved to the window, looking out at the staff beginning their morning routines. David was helping Maria carry supplies from the storage shed, both moving more carefully than usual, as if the estate itself might shatter. "They're terrified," she observed. "They should be. Fear keeps them alive." "Does it?" Loveland turned to face him. "Or does it just keep them obedient?" John finally looked at her, his scarred face catching the morning light. "You want to know why I am the way I am? Everyone does eventually. Only if you want to tell me." He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair across from him. Loveland sat, and John began speaking in a voice that sounded like it was dragging words from somewhere deep and buried. "I had a brother, Dimitri, younger by 3 years. John's fingers traced the scars on his face unconsciously. "He believed in things I thought were naive. Honor, mercy, second chances. He thought you could build power through respect instead of fear." Loveland stayed quiet, listening. 15 years ago, we had a rival, Yuri Volkov, Victor's older brother. He was expanding into our territory, killing our people. Everyone said we had to hit back hard. Send a message. But Dimitri convinced me to try negotiation first. John's jaw clenched. He said mercy was strength, not weakness. I believed him. The whiskey glass trembled slightly in John's hand. "We met Yuri in a warehouse. Neutral ground. I offered him a deal, split the territory, avoid a war. He agreed, shook my hand, called us brothers." John's laugh was bitter. Then he activated the bomb he'd planted under the table. Loveland's breath caught. "Dimitri saw the timer first. Pushed me toward the exit. The explosion threw me into broken glass and metal. That's where these came from." John touched his scars again. "When I came to, the building was collapsing. I found Dimitri under a beam. He was still breathing, still trying to smile. Told me it wasn't my fault. That mercy was still worth it. Then he died in my arms while I was too weak to lift the steel crushing him." The library fell silent except for distant sounds of the estate waking. "I killed Yuri 3 days later," John continued flatly. "Slowly. Then I killed everyone who'd helped him. Then I rebuilt everything on a simple principle: never show weakness. Never trust mercy. Never let anyone see anything but the monster they fear." His eyes met Loveland's. "Because monsters don't lose their brothers. Monsters don't feel pain. Monsters survive." Loveland let his words settle before speaking. "My father was Antonio Garcia. People in our neighborhood called him Ghost because he moved shipments no one else could move. He worked for the Salazar cartel for 10 years. John's eyebrows rose slightly. "Garcia was your father?" "Until I was 14. Loveland's voice stayed steady, but her hands folded tightly in her lap. "He wanted out. Wanted to go legitimate. The Salazars don't accept resignations. They came to our house on a Tuesday night. Made my mother and sister and me watch while they beat him. While they shot him. While he bled out on our kitchen floor. They left us alive as a warning to anyone else who thought about leaving." "How did you survive?" "My grandmother took us in. Taught us that surviving meant becoming invisible. That power like theirs couldn't be fought, only endured." Loveland's dark eyes held his. "But my father spent his last words telling me not to let fear make me small. Not to let their violence define who I became. So I learned to shoot. To fight. To be ready. Not to become like them, but to never be helpless again." John leaned forward, studying her face. "Then you understand. You know why I had to become this." "I understand the why," Loveland said carefully. "But John, your scars don't make you a monster. The explosion didn't make you this way. You chose this. After Dimitri died, you chose to let the pain turn you into something your brother wouldn't recognize." John's face hardened. "He's dead. What he'd think doesn't matter. Doesn't it?" Loveland's voice was gentle but unflinching. "You built an empire on intimidation because you thought that's what would keep you safe. But you're not safer. You're just more alone, more trapped, more exactly what Yuri wanted you to become." At least I'm alive. Are you? Loveland leaned forward. Or did you just bury yourself next to Dimitri and let something else wear your face? John stood abruptly, anger flashing across his features. But before he could speak, Loveland stood too, closing the distance between them. What you choose to do with your pain, that's what matters, she said quietly. Not the scars, not the past, not what they did to you. What you choose now, who you decide to be with the time you have left. John's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, Loveland thought he might yell, might order her out, might return to the safe distance of employer and servant. But instead, his shoulders dropped slightly, and something that might have been exhaustion crossed his face. And who do you think I should be? His voice was raw. Loveland met his eyes steadily. The man your brother believed you were. Before fear made you forget. He was still walking freely through the house. 4 days after the Russian attack, Sierra Garcia disappeared on her walk home from school. Loveland's hands shook as she read the text from her grandmother. Sierra never came home. Police say wait 24 hours. I'm scared. The phone nearly slipped from her fingers as panic flooded her chest. She was reaching for her coat when Marcus appeared in the servants' hallway, his expression grave with false concern. Loveland, John needs to see you. Now. It's urgent. She followed him to John's study, fear making her movements mechanical. John stood behind his desk, his scarred face unreadable, a manila folder open in front of him. Marcus closed the door behind them with a soft click. Tell me this isn't true, John said quietly, turning the folder toward her. Loveland's blood went cold. Inside were photos, her talking to someone outside the estate gates. Bank statements showing deposits to an account with her name. Text messages discussing the plan, and when he's vulnerable. All of it fake. All of it convincing. She's been working with the Russians, Marcus said from behind her, his voice heavy with regret. I didn't want to believe it either. But after the attack, I had to investigate everyone. The evidence is, where's my sister? Loveland's voice cut through his performance. She turned to face Marcus, recognition flooding through her. What did you do? Marcus's mask of concern didn't slip. Your sister? I don't know what. The financial records, Loveland interrupted, looking at John. From Marcus's office. He's been stealing from you for years. I found proof. He threatened Sierra if I told you. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. He took her. This is all. Convenient story, Marcus said smoothly. Show me these supposed records. Loveland opened her photo gallery and her heart stopped. Empty. Every image she'd taken was gone. Marcus must have remotely wiped her phone when he'd accidentally asked to borrow it yesterday to make a call. John's eyes hardened, looking at her empty screen, then at Marcus's fabricated evidence. 15 years of trust warring with 4 weeks of something he couldn't name. John, please, Loveland's voice cracked. He's setting me up. He has Sierra. You have to. She's desperate, Marcus said sadly. They always are when they're caught. John's hand moved toward the gun on his desk, and Loveland saw her death in his eyes, saw Dimitri's death reflected there, the betrayal that had shaped him. But then something shifted. John's hand stopped. His gaze moved between Marcus and Loveland, and for the first time, he looked past the evidence to the people presenting it. Marcus, who'd been perfectly positioned to feed the Russians information. Who'd convinced John to send most of his security detail away tonight for a supply pickup. Who'd never once questioned John's darkness because he benefited from it. And Loveland, who'd stopped his fist. Who'd fought beside him. Who'd seen his scars and called him human anyway. Marcus, John said slowly, how did you know to investigate Loveland specifically? Marcus's smile flickered for just a second. After the attack, I investigated everyone. Everyone? John's hand moved away from the gun. Or just the one person who made me hesitate. The study door burst open. 4 armed men entered, weapons raised, Marcus's men, not John's. Marcus's easy smile vanished completely, replaced by cold calculation. I'm sorry it came to this, Marcus said. But you've become a liability, old friend. Too distracted, too soft. It's time for new leadership. John's jaw clenched, but he didn't reach for his weapon. They were outgunned, surrounded. Loveland felt the world narrowing to this moment, Sierra's life, John's life, everything balanced on a knife's edge. I'm sorry I couldn't save my brother, John said quietly, his eyes meeting Loveland's. But I won't fail to save your sister. And despite the guns pointed at them, despite Marcus's betrayal, despite everything falling apart, Loveland believed him. Marcus poured himself a drink from John's personal bar, savoring the moment like fine wine. His men had tied John and Loveland to chairs in the center of the study, weapons trained on them from every angle. Outside, the estate continued its morning routines, staff unaware that everything was ending. "Do you want to know the truth?" Marcus swirled his whiskey, watching the light catch in the amber liquid. "I mean the real truth, not the version you've been living for 15 years?" John's scarred face remained expressionless, but his eyes burned. "Enlighten me. Yuri Volkov didn't plant that bomb." Marcus smiled. "I did." The words hung in the air like poison. Loveland felt John go rigid beside her, every muscle tensing against his restraints. "You see, Dmitri was right about one thing. You were too soft back then. Too willing to negotiate. Too human." Marcus took a slow sip. "You would have made deals, built partnerships, maybe even gone legitimate eventually. Where's the profit in that? Where's the empire I deserved to inherit? So you killed my brother." John's voice was deadly quiet. "I created you," Marcus corrected. "I needed a monster. Someone so brutal, so feared, that when I finally took over, everyone would welcome the change." The reasonable Marcus, saving them from the scarred tyrant. He gestured at John like presenting artwork. "And you played your part perfectly. Every slap, every broken bone, every terrified employee. You built your own prison while I built my reputation." Loveland's mind raced through 15 years of manipulation. "The Russians. Work for me now," Marcus finished. "Victor and I have an arrangement. I feed him information, he applies pressure at the right moments, and when John finally falls, we split the empire." He smiled at John. "Last night's attack? That was just theater. Make you paranoid. Make you trust her less. Make you more isolated." "The police?" John asked. "On my payroll. The other families? I've been whispering about your instability for months. Everyone's just waiting for you to collapse so they can carve up the pieces." Marcus set down his glass. "I've turned you into exactly what I needed, a pariah everyone wants gone." John stared at the man he'd trusted for 15 years, his jaw working. Then, incredibly, he laughed. Low and dark, the sound of something breaking or finally understanding. "What's funny?" Marcus frowned. "You created the monster you wanted," John said, his scarred face splitting into a cold smile. "But you forgot, monsters are very hard to kill." The lights went out. In the darkness, Loveland felt John's hand find hers. Not by accident, by design. He'd positioned them close enough when Marcus's men tied them up, and now his fingers worked at her restraints with practiced efficiency. She did the same for him, their weeks of unspoken understanding translating into perfect coordination. When Marcus's men fumbled for flashlights, John and Loveland were already moving. John fought with surgical precision, no wasted rage, no blind fury. Each strike calculated, efficient, the monster Marcus created now turned against him. But it was different this time. Controlled, human. Loveland grabbed a fallen weapon and faced the men who'd taken Sierra. Her father's killers flashed through her mind, the paralysis, the helplessness. But this time she wasn't 14. This time she chose action over fear. Her shots found their marks. Within minutes, Marcus's men lay disabled or fled. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the study in red. Marcus stood cornered by the shattered windows, his smooth facade finally cracked. "John, wait, we can make a deal." John's fist connected with Marcus's jaw, dropping him. But he didn't continue, didn't unleash 15 years of rage. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call that went to every major player in the underworld. "Marcus Delian killed my brother," John said simply. "He's been stealing from me for 15 years. He planned to betray all of you next. I have proof. Come collect him." By noon, Sierra was safe, found in a warehouse Marcus had used for his side operations. She ran into Loveland's arms, shaking but unharmed. John stood back, watching the reunion, something softening in his scarred face. "She's going to college," he told Loveland later. "Full scholarship. My gift. John. It's not charity. It's payment. For saving my life. For showing me I could still choose." The changes came slowly, then all at once. John stopped ruling through fear and started leading with clarity. Staff stopped moving like ghosts and started asking questions. The household transformed from prison to organization, still dangerous, still powerful, but built on loyalty earned rather than terror inflicted. Loveland didn't leave. She became his partner, equal in decisions, conscience in darkness, the person who reminded him daily that scars tell stories but don't write futures. 3 months later, John stood before his assembled organization with Loveland beside him, her hand steady on his arm. His lieutenants watched warily, expecting the old John. Instead, they saw something new. "Fear made me powerful," John said, his scarred face catching the light. "But strength will make us unbreakable." Things changed starting today. And for the first time in 15 years, John Cone looked at his reflection and recognized the man staring back.